Presentation with Phil Haney, who is a Department of Homeland Security intelligence officer, and I'm just going to let him tell his story. His story is amazing. He's got a webinar that goes with it, and I'm just going to turn the show over to you, Phil, and let you go forward.
Okay, well, hello everyone. I'm glad to be here. This is a little bit of a hybrid between radio and kind of like TV. At least I'm not staring into a big black box from a remote. So I appreciate you coming on. Hopefully you can all see the screen here. It says PowerPoint slide, says Pockets of Resistance webinar. Senate Judiciary hearings. I was going to start with some of the most recent events that have happened in this long story of being a Customs and Border Protection officer, founding member of the Department of Homeland Security, which was created in March of 2003. And Jim, I'm going to rely on you for just a minute to make sure we're functioning here.
Okay.
The next slide come up? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Well, there's a lot on this slide, but it's very important. This is some background that'll kind of put us in the right arena for why some of the things I'll be telling you about as we go forward are so important. Because there's links and ties to the global Islamic movement, that many of which started, incredibly enough, right here in America. Not over in Afghanistan or Pakistan, but right here in America. So, can you see my cursor moving?
Yep.
Oh, that's great. All right. Right down here where it says the memorandum is derived from, this is referring to the explanatory memorandum, which most of us have probably heard of. It is the strategic and tactical document that was written by a man named Mohammed Akram Adluni, which, by the way, is not some marginal fringe character, as the apologists in America try to say, but he's an active duty fundraiser right now, primarily operating in Europe and in the Far East. And you can find him easily if you Google him. A stout fellow, Mohammed Akram Adluni. He was part of the Shura Council. So let's take my cursor. The general strategic goal of the group in America, which was approved by the Shura Council and the Organizational Conference for the year 1987. So this is a high level. This is a high level project that was initiated by the Muslim Brotherhood organization that was established in the middle 60s, in other words, about 20 years prior to this 1987 date. Their goal is the enablement of Islam in North America. That includes, of course, Canada and the United States, meaning establish an effective and stable Islamic movement. What is ISIS called? Islamic movement. That's why I call it the global Islamic movement. None of the terms that I ever discuss in public are ever my own creations. I always use terminology that they themselves use. Led by the Muslim Brotherhood. So there they describe themselves as the leaders of the Islamic movement. And it adopts Muslim causes both domestically and globally. Now you'll notice I'm always referring to both domestic and global activities because that's the way they look at it as well. And which works to expand the observant Muslim base, aims at unifying and directing Muslims' efforts, presenting Islam as a civilizational alternative, and supports the global Islamic State wherever it is. How many times do we hear that ISIS is not Islamic? And then the short name IS, Islamic State, is not Islamic. The Islamic State did not borrow these terms and descriptions or create them themselves. They've already been established within the lexicon of the global Islamic movement. They're only calling themselves what they have essentially been authorized to call themselves. Okay, and this whole priority is approved by the Sharia Council for the work of the group in its current and former session, which is what, Jim? So these terms and these actions go all the way back to the very beginning of the explanatory memorandum's strategic and tactical goals. I want to turn your attention now to the observant Muslim base. By the way, can you hear me, Jim?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Are we all right on the sound and everything?
Yeah, you could speak up a little, perhaps.
I'll try.
Okay.
Okay, observant Muslim base. I'm focusing on this phrase right here. Well, what it is now, I'm going to translate it from, this is the Arabic right there for this term, observant Muslim base. And
Okay.
here's what it says. Al-Qaeda, Al-Muslimina, Al-Mutsima, which means the base, the Muslim, the observant, or it also means obedient. So this phrase, Al-Qaeda, Al-Muslimina, Al-Mutsima, is an operating principle of the global Islamic movement as driven by the Muslim Brotherhood, established by the Sharia Council in North America in 1987, which is 10 years before Osama bin Laden's fatwa against America, declaring jihad. Al-Qaeda, therefore, is not an organization as much as it is an abstract concept. It's the operating base of the global Islamic community. And what's important to note is this was crystallized by the Muslim Brotherhood in 1987 in North America, not in Pakistan or Afghanistan. And this word up here is classic Arabic grammar, Al-Qaeda. That's a D right there, it's a, so that's what that says, Al-Qaeda, which is the same as that word right there. So it's an important concept to grasp. Muslim apologists like CARE, etc., ISNA, they always want to marginalize the explanatory memorandum, because if we actually do what we're doing right now, it's pretty horrifying what they're actually trying to do. And they're very plain in their description of what their intentions are. So the next slide, bringing us up a little further into more closer to modern time, is the Holy Land Foundation trial, which was concluded in November 2008. Now, I focus on the Holy Land trial because it was a turning point in our counterterrorism efforts. The reason why it was a turning point is because from all the events that happened subsequent from November 2008 on until this very day, today, July 10th of 2016, were done intentionally and deliberately by this administration. What I'm trying to say is that the Holy Land trial was executed by the Department of Justice, and they proved irrefutably in federal court in Dallas, Texas, that groups like Council on American Islamic Relations, Islamic Society of North America, North American Islamic Trust, and many other ones that we hear about so often, were all irrefutably tied to financial support of Hamas, which at that time, in November 2008, had already been a globally designated terrorist organization for almost 10 years. So, any affiliations and alliances and arrangements that this administration made with these groups subsequently was done with deliberate disregard for irrefutable evidence that they were affiliated with Hamas. Now we come fast forwarding to the hearings that were held on June 28th in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, with Chairman Cruz as leading the questioning. Willful blindness, consequences of agency efforts to de-emphasize radical Islam in combating terrorism. And that's exactly what I just stated in a little bit different words. The decisions that the Obama administration made vis-a-vis our counterterrorism policy, both domestically and in foreign arena, were done deliberately and intentionally. They were willfully blind to the facts that were sitting right there in front of them. I tell people quite often that if I could sit President Obama and Secretary Jay Johnson down in a room with a magic computer, that I could show them derogatory information on all these groups and individuals that's in the law enforcement system in 5 minutes, not even 2 minutes, probably a minute. It's that easy to find if you're looking for it. And it's not just myself that put the information in. It's some of my colleagues over the years that also had an emphasis on this particular subject. And when they were pulled into the Department of Homeland Security, they continued doing the work that they were doing in other agencies like ICE or Customs, etc. And we formed a coalition of specialists within the agency. And for the first 2 or 3 years, we were very effective. We had hundreds and hundreds of law enforcement-based actions on individuals and or the actual organizations affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. But that all changed very soon after the November 2008 trial. In particular, the sign of it was President Obama's A New Beginning speech that was held at Al-Azhar University on the 4th of June 2009, when he declared to the Muslim world that we were going to have a reset on our relations with them and that we were going to consider their civil rights and civil liberties as a high priority. So now we come to these hearings. I went to Congress when I was active duty between the year 2012 and the year July of 2015 when I retired 45 times. In meetings kind of similar to what you saw with the Judiciary Committee, except that they were behind closed doors. They weren't public. But this is the first time that there was ever a public meeting to address some of the concerns that I've been bringing up to Congress for all those times, 45 times in 4 years. This is a screenshot taken from the hearings on the 28th, top one, and Farhana Kara is over here, and Mr. Cohen is over here. Mr. Cohen runs the Southern Poverty Law Center, which designates groups like the Center for Security Policy, Family Research Council, James Dodson's groups, and a bunch of other ones as hate groups. Meanwhile, Farhana Kara, she was one of my most implacable adversaries during my whole time in active duty because she spearheaded the pushing of law enforcement out of the counterterrorism policy, arena, and replaced it with civil rights and civil liberties priorities, aka countering violent extremism. And the fatal flaw in the whole countering violent extremism approach or policy is really quite simple. It's based on tactics. They never address the strategy of the global Islamic movement, which is actually quite simple. It's derived from Quran 2, chapter 2, verse 191 through 193, which is essentially to implement Sharia law and to fight against the world until the law of Islam, meaning Sharia, is implemented everywhere on the face of the earth. That's the strategy. What's complicated and kaleidoscopic is the tactics. Countering violent extremism is based on tactics. Therefore, it will never succeed because tactics change constantly, as will a kaleidoscope. I just put this slide here in because as a reminder, as Senator Cruz pointed out, we have degraded our ability to describe the nature of the threat we face to the point where not a single one of the descriptive phrases that our adversaries use to describe themselves are even included in any of the official government documents that are supposedly addressing the nature of the threat that we space. Now this is an icon of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is the Quran, of course. And the reason why there are two crossed swords is for the enforcement of Sharia law internally and the promotion and implementation or establishment of Sharia law externally. These words right here, that says Al-Ikhwan, that means brothers, and this is Al-Muslimin, that is Islam, so it's the brothers of Islam. And this word down here is Wa'uda, which means prepare. It's derived from Quran 8:60. Prepare yourselves to terrify your enemies. And it's Turhabina. And if anyone ever tells you that the word terrorism is not in the Quran, they're either ignorant of the Quran or deliberately trying to misinform you, because the word terror is in the Quran. In fact, it's right next to the word here. It's derived from Quran 8:60. So this is the motto of the supposedly moderate Muslim Brotherhood, that this administration has overtly and deliberately and intentionally chosen to solicit as an ally in their counterterrorism efforts, both domestically, vis-a-vis the Muslim Brotherhood front groups like CARE, ISNA, and NAIT, and internationally, in terms of their support for the Arab Spring and what happened in Tunisia, in Libya, in Syria, and so on. And that leads partly to Benghazi, because what was actually happening in Benghazi, according to the Defense Intelligence Agency's own report that was published originally in August of 2012, 1 month before the attacks in Benghazi, is that this administration was running weapons from Benghazi over to Syria, supplying them three main groups, which was Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda of Iraq, and specifically Muslim Brotherhood. That was the coalition. The second thing that they, or the third thing that they did, was encourage them to take eastern Syria as a buffer between Iran and Assad, which they did. And then they looked over their shoulder and noticed the back door of Iraq was wide open, and they took it. So we had a large part to play, I should say, this administration, in the engendering of what is now known as ISIS. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that there are no exclusion zones in this globe. North America is not exempt from the strategic and tactical goals of the global Islamic movement. That's, by the way, why I held this up, and I explained it some. I believe between the four of us, when I say the four of us, I mean Zuhdi Jasser, myself, Chris Galbitz, and Andrew McCarthy, talked more about Sharia law in the hearings than ever had been done in history. And some of the staffers on the Hill the day after said that. They said it was the most important briefing, in their opinion, that had ever been given on the Hill. And that's not my words, that was their words. Now here's another organization that is virtually unknown, even among some of our allies, but this is, in my opinion, the most ominously, malevolently dangerous organization in the entire panoply of Muslim Brotherhood front groups. It's called the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America. And you'll notice again a similar icon to the Muslim Brotherhood's icon. There's North America right there. You do not see an exclusion zone for North America, just as you didn't see one with Muslim Brotherhood. Now over here, these wheat symbols, that's exactly the same wheat symbols that you saw in the original icon of the Holy Land Foundation before it was shut down after the trial. And this Quranic verse means to rely on others who have wisdom than you for guidance, which is apropos to this organization, which is Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America. Now, so far that doesn't sound too bad, I suppose. But let's go up here and look what this Arabic says over here. This word right here is majama. Mashama is a derivative of the same root that means shamat, like tabliki shamat. It means a group or an assembly. That's the word assembly. This right here is from kaha, which is a plural of the word for fiqh, which means lawyers. These are a group of lawyers. And here's the real important one. This word right here is al-Sharia. That's A-L-Sh-R-A. Al-Sharia. That's pure Arabic grammar for what we know of as Sharia. And this over here is Amrikia. That means in America. So this is a group of lawyers specializing in implementation of Sharia law in America. Not anything like their name in English. And yet they operate openly right here in the United States. And they're not only a U.S. organization, they're part of what is called a global ijtima, a consensus group. And every year or two they have meetings, usually overseas, where they talk about issues that are the Muslim community in America is facing, and they issue fatwas on them. And for example, whether Muslims in America should work for the U.S. government, whether they should be in law enforcement, whether they should join the military, in questions about interest and commerce, remarriage, divorce, etc. They issue fatwas on their website in English addressing these questions. But they are overtly promoting Sharia law, but not in their English name. And I just took this off their website from 29th of June, just to show that it's still an active organization. I showed that in the hearing too, by the way. So now we're going to come to an incredible sequence of events that happened on the 30th of June, 2 days after we gave our testimony, where in direct connection, Senator Cruz asked my former boss, Jay Johnson, about my claims vis-a-vis the purge records. And Senator Cruz pointed to a graphic documenting DHS's elimination of Islamic terminology. That was that poster board that I showed you earlier. And then he specifically asked him about the administration modifying or eliminating more than 800 of my records relating to the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. And he asked him, is that testimony accurate? And some of you, I'm sure, heard him say, I have no idea. I don't know who Mr. Actually, he said Hannon, not Haney. I wouldn't know him if he walked in the room. Well, first of all, I went public in December of 2015. If Secretary Johnson's job is national security, and I made some very serious claims in public, he should have had a staff meeting the following morning and asked his staff about me and what I said, and if I was misinforming the American public, it should have been his duty to discredit me immediately. Otherwise, I'm actually, according to his policy, putting Americans in danger by claiming that the Muslim Brotherhood is involved in terrorism, because that's their stated policy, that they work with this Muslim Brotherhood front groups in order to let them help us fight terrorism. So I'm actually overtly contradicting their main policy. However, on the other hand, if what I said was really true, then they should have taken steps to address it and looked into it in an honest and ethical way. But according to him, he did not do either. Now, I'm not going to walk through this whole quotation here, but he makes it very plain that he doesn't know me, and then he says, I have not taken the time to investigate what Mr. Haney said. So this is a grotesque aberration of duty. When somebody that's in your own agency or just retired from it makes overt claims that people in America are being put in danger by the administration's policy, as that's his job. That's national security. But he said he didn't look in. Then he riffed into this abstract discussion, saying that the debate was very interesting, but that he didn't really care. It didn't make any difference to him, and that it makes good political debate. But in our efforts here in the homeland to start giving the Islamic State the credence that they want, and so on and so on, he didn't answer the question at all. The records were about the Muslim Brotherhood, not about the Islamic State. And they weren't just terms and semantics, they were what we call biometrics that were deleted, which has to do with birthdays, family names, travel patterns, passport numbers, correct addresses. That's what was deleted from the records, not semantic labels. And then he said to Jay Johnson, "You're practicing willful blindness right now." And I would also suggest that he's practicing what the name of the book is. See something, say nothing. Well, this was a spectacular display of hubris, and an Academy Award-winning scriptwriter couldn't have done or created a more incredible scenario than what I saw. And it was satisfying in a way and distressing in another. Satisfying because finally, in open public, in a testimony before a Senate Oversight Committee, not just an ordinary Senate hearing, this is Senate Oversight, Mr. Johnson had the audacity to dismiss the whole my claims as just not important, didn't take time. And then he claimed that he didn't know me. Now I want to look into that a little bit and see whether he was really being honest or not. And here we go. On January 13th, 2015, which was about a month after I spoke on Megan, no, I put the wrong date. That should be 2016, everybody, right there. See, that's there. He said in a public meeting at the university in Michigan that someone specifically asked him about the claims that I had made on Megan. He said that he had read my article on the Hill, but he didn't comment any further on it. So the fact is, he did know me. Maybe he misremembered, but the fact is that he did know me. Now, the op-ed that he's referring to is being referred to right here, is this one. And where I said administration mixed probe into Southern California jihadists, which, by the way, brings us into an entirely different arena than the Muslim Brotherhood network. This is an entirely different branch of Islam having to do with Tablighi Jamaat and the Deobandi movement. And in the case of these records, the administration completely obliterated them out of the system. They didn't just modify them as they did with the Muslim Brotherhood records, the 820. They completely took them out of the system and then turned around and investigated me for putting them in the system in the first place. So we have two things going on here. Somebody just asked if the Tablighi Jamaat is mentioned in the Holy Land trial. I don't believe so. Although there is overlap, subsequently we discovered that they are not a separate, or I should say autonomous, branch of Islam, but they interact quite a bit with Muslim Brotherhood, in particular in the mosques. They move freely through the mosques of both Sunni and Shia Islam. So this is the editorial that is referred to here. Next is another evidence that Secretary Johnson knew me. And this is screenshots of, I was on, I think it was Fox and Friends on February 11th And this, after Brian Kilmeade asked me why they should believe me, I told him it's happening right now as we speak. The CRCL, Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, which, by the way, Farhana Kara, the woman that was at the hearings, is very, very involved with, said plainly, and they posted it on the Fox screen, that they're an important part of DHS internal oversight, ensuring employees are following proper policy and procedure, upholding basic constitutional principles. Well, the problem is that foreign nationals don't have constitutional rights. Somehow, by default, they're providing constitutional protections to people that are not even citizens of our country. And then they concluded by saying any implication that CRCL does not share the important mission of DHS is misplaced. That's as close as they ever come to addressing my claims. But this is also under the purview of Secretary Johnson. It's just another evidence that his agency does know me, though he claimed that he didn't. And then here we have something from Judicial Watch, which is one of the most satisfying articles that have ever been written, because they completely validated all of my claims using FOIA documents. When I was being investigated toward the end of my career by the Department of Justice and Customs and Border Protection Internal Affairs and the Inspector General of DHS, meaning 3 different investigations all at the same time, I was told by the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General's office that I would have to FOIA my own case. Even though it was about me, they wouldn't let me see my own case. So, Judicial Watch took their suggestion and FOIA'd my case. And even though they didn't actually give us anything that we originally asked for, what they did give us was a cache of documents, which lo and behold had the emails going back and forth between DHS and my port management describing the reasons why they deleted the records. And it was based on civil rights and civil liberties concerns. And then about a week after the San Bernardino shootings occurred, DHS came out, CRCL, and made a public statement that the reason that they did not query Tashfeen Malik's social media was that they were concerned about violation of her civil rights and civil liberties. Thus, we have a full circle. Everything that I stated, that I asserted, was true. It was proved by FOIA documents. It was proven true by the administration's own actions and words. Now, that's the end of my PowerPoint. So what I'd like to do is just go ahead and open it up to questions now.
Okay. All right, I'm going to unmute everybody, but I would ask that you please keep your own mic muted so that there's no background noise. I'm going to unmute you all. You can mute yourselves, or if you're not going to do that, remain perfectly quiet and don't have any background noise. So everybody is unmuted at this point. First, let me ask yeah. Oh, wait a minute. We got way too much background noise here. Let's see. How do I manage? I'm going to mute everybody again because it's getting too noisy.
Jim, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe people who want to ask questions can can send a text. Hey, Kirsten, we don't need webcams up. Well, actually, maybe no, that'll just make it too complicated. Let's see here. We've got 48 people. That's a lot. Yep. So use the chat box to the right. And okay, so here's the first question for you from Denise Simon. Phil, do you have access to the Holy Land Foundation documents?
Yes, I do. I have quite a few of them. And the investigative project on terrorism, Steve Emerson's group,
Right.
also has them all too.
Are those publicly accessible, or are they something that they're keeping? She says Emerson.
Well, he has a website that has a pretty good archive. There was another organization that used to have them, but they didn't stay in business. So it's been a while since I tried to find if there were any other sources besides Steve Emerson's group.
Uh-huh.
But, oh, maybe if they're referring to the larger cache of documents, I'm not sure if anybody has access to them.
Yeah.
They're stored away in some Indiana Jones warehouse right now. The time frame of the book, I'll just answer the questions as they pop. The time frame of the book is from 9/11 right through the San Bernardino shootings.
Okay. Paula Nachman asks, doesn't Dio Bondi act like Johnny Appleseed, not online or publicly, but moving physically from one Muslim community and mosque to another?
Yeah, the closest parallel in the biblical or Christian perspective would be evangelists, except that they don't travel just by themselves or one. Deoband is a place in India, in north-central India. It's a city. So the movement started there in about the 1860s. And then they found that they had common cause with the Wahhabi regime in Saudi Arabia. They found out about it during Hajj. And that's why Saudi Arabia supports all those madrasas in the Asian or Indian subcontinent because they're almost all Deobandi in nature.
Oh. Don Barnett wants to know, and this is I'm interested in this question also, how important is the OIC in selecting refugees for the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program? That's a good question.
I know that the first level of the selection process is completely run by the UN. We have abrogated our responsibility to the vetting process to the UN. The second level is the State Department, who issues the visas.
Right.
And the third level, which should actually be the first level, are the law enforcement agencies like CBP, where we actually encounter them face-to-face when they come to the border. But we don't have access to the information that's used to make the vetting decisions. We're just going blind, literally blind.
Wow.
So it's completely upside down from the way it should be. So as far as OIC vis-a-vis the UN, I would say that the OIC basically has the UN right where they want them. I mean, they dominate the entire dynamic of the UN because they're the largest. They are actually the largest NGO on the planet other than the UN itself.
Okay. I have a question from Dick Manasari. Asked, does your work allow you to connect any mosques in Michigan to the SB or Orlando or other dangerous mosques?
I'd have to go back and look, but the records that were deleted, meaning the 67 that was the core concentrated analysis of the Daraloon network in the United States. It includes both San Bernardino and Orlando.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there are some sites in Michigan as well, but particularly around Chicago, some of the major institutions in Chicago, but they're spread all the way across, because anywhere, just check your local, just check Darul. If you have Darul, D-A-R-U-L space U-L-O-O-M, any Darul organizations in your state, they are connected to the network.
Wow. Did you know all these records were erased from the DHS database, but did you keep any as copies for, like, was there any
I provided
backup
them to
anywhere?
Congress. Everything is backed up.
It is backed
Nothing. Yep. You have to remember, I was a scientist before I was a counterterrorism specialist.
up.
I was an entomologist, and I was a nerd. You know, nerds just write everything down, and I did. I kept it all, and I gave it to Congress. It's safely secured, so that when, for example, administration changes and they investigate in the Judiciary or intelligence committees on both House and Senate side want to have hearings and investigations, I'll be quite capable of providing them with more than enough information for them to be successful. Unlike the Terminator. Remember the Terminator when he looked at, what was the woman's name in Terminator?
Yeah, I don't.
Sarah Connor.
Yeah.
I have extensive files. That's what he told me. So, yeah.
That's great. That's fantastic. Kirsten Hill, what time frame did you book cover? The answer to that. When did Phil first realize, this is from Olga Matlin, when did Phil first realize the depth of the corruption?
Well, I slammed into the wall with the DHS in 2006 when I wrote an article. It's still on the web. It's called Green Tide Rising, Hamas Ascends. And I got investigated for it. They said that I couldn't have written an article like that without unethically accessing classified information. Of course, Hamas is already a designated terrorist organization, so why anybody in DHS who got in trouble for writing an article about Hamas is beyond me. But if you go online and look it up, you will see that it looks like it was written yesterday, literally. It's that current. But anyway, after 11 months, I was exonerated. It took that long. But that was the first of 9 investigations, and for me, it started in the fall of 2006.
Bob Gass provided me with a bunch of questions. I'm not sure you can answer all of them, but I'll ask a few here. Which jihad Islamist group or groups pose the greatest short and long-term threat to the U.S. and Western countries? That's a good question.
The most dangerous group of all of them is that one I showed you, is simply Muslim Jurists of America.
All right. Because
they are implementing Sharia law, which after all is the strategy of the global Islamic movement. They are doing what the Muslim Brotherhood's strategic and tactical plan is, the Al-Mutsima, Al-Islamiyya, Al-Qaeda. They're doing it. And they should not be allowed to operate because it's a subversion of the Constitution. Not only the Constitution, but civil law at the state and federal level. If they're allowed to continue, they're going to split United States in half, or into quarters, or into sections, because some states will conceivably allow Sharia and some will not. So this needs to be addressed. See, the threat we face is not terrorism. The threat we face is not jihad or violent extremism or attacks. The threat we face is the implementation of Sharia. Those are only tactics. And if there was no violence attached to Sharia law, in terms of implementation, it still would be illegal. Because once they implement Sharia law, then the whole culture will change.
Yeah.
And it won't be what the country that we know of it. And we cannot allow it to grow unchecked within our country.
Yeah.
We have to address it.
So Bob Gast asks again, what must be done within the intelligence structure of the U.S. to successfully oppose the threat, the threat from short and long-term Islam, Orthodox Islam, and Sharia in the U.S.?
What we need to do, is go back and upgrade our approach within the active duty ranks and teach them what the nature of the threat really is, and develop an entirely new set of criteria for vetting people to the United States. Problem is that DHS doesn't issue visas. The State Department does.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that. There was some discussion of that during my career, of actually allowing DHS to be the one that issues visas.
Yeah.
But now we have a gigantic gaping hole between law enforcement and State Department. See, State Department operate politically and be blind to law enforcement concerns.
Yeah, right.
While DHS is focused on law enforcement, but we don't have any control over the visa process.
Right.
That's what happened with Abu Muttalib, the underwear bomber. He visa shopped. He was turned down twice, and then he finally got a visa in the UK at the consulate or the embassy in the UK. He just kept going until he finally got one. And so that shows you right there the flaw in the system.
Right.
And not only that, but people like Hillary Clinton, when she decided to invite Tariq Ramadan to the United States, she just overrode all immigration law and encouraged him to apply for a visa. And then Janet Napolitano went along with it and instructed the people in Chicago to admit him. So somewhere around 7, 8, 9 in that region, State and DHS morphed into one macro organization, meaning Janet Napolitano and Hillary Clinton worked very close together.
Yeah. Well,
I hope that's a good answer.
Yeah. Here's two related questions. Hold on. First of all, there's a lot of questions here. How do we identify Deobandi in our towns, and how does one track the Tablighi Jamaat to determine if there's any activity in our areas?
The easiest way is to find out what languages the masjids are taught to speak. If they're Urdu or Pashtun from the Indian subcontinent, the chances are really high they'll be affiliated with Deobandi Tablighi. Okay. There's something else you need to know. Just like fingers on a hand, the Deoband is the hand. Tablighi Jamaat is one finger. Lash Qataiba, the ones that did the Mumbai, are another finger.
The ones that did the what?
Mumbai massacre.
Oh, okay.
They're also Deobandis. And the third one, which we all know of, may not have realized they're Deobandi, is the Taliban. The Taliban is just a plural for the word student. Talib. Talib is a student. Taliban is plural for student. So what are they students of? The Deobandi branch of Islam. I asked one of the Tablighi madrasa boys one time if he ever went on a journey over in that part of the world, and he told me he did. Did you ever encounter any Taliban? And he said, yes, I did. And he said, Well, I asked him something like, "What did you do?" or "What's it like?" And he said, "The Taliban told me, you pray, I'll shoot." I thought that sums it up pretty well. You pray, I'll shoot. The shooters are the Taliban, and the tabligis are the prayers, so to speak. That's the distinction between them. Just like Hamas. Hamas is the equivalent of the Taliban on the MB side, whereas somebody like, I don't know, CARE is more like Tablighi. They infiltrate and insinuate. Their tactic is not kinetic. Their tactic is dawah, meaning promotion of Islam. But it's all for the same strategic purpose, the implementation of Sharia law.
Are you familiar with the book Defeating Jihad, The Winnable War by Sebastian Gorka?
Mm-hmm. Sebastian and I are friends, colleagues.
Do you agree with his methodology for the U.S. winning the war against, Orthodox Islamists?
Well, you'll have to help me touch point a couple of his main premise is if it has to do with identifying the nature of the strategic goal of Sharia, because again, jihad is a tactic.
Right.
And as long as we fight tactics, we will never win.
Right.
That's why CBE is doomed to fail.
So how do we win?
Well, first of all, we've got to take them at their word, meaning a good starting point would be push the designation of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization.
Right.
Then for people, all this argument about, for example, Huma Abedin would be a moot question.
Yeah.
Would have never got her clearance if she was affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, which the Muslim Students Association is, if the Muslim Brotherhood was recognized for the type of organization that it actually is. Look at their icon. How many MBs are in the administration now? Probably 15 or 20, plus or minus, because they come and go, and they're not always overtly identified, and there's some of them that most of you probably have never heard of before. That are more, like, for instance, the person that wrote the Words Matter memo in 2008. Shafiq Safar. He's probably one of the most influential of all, but he's kind of like the AMJA. Most people have never heard of him, and yet they have more influence than virtually any other organization in the whole collection of them. And Masjid is definitely MB. Imam Masjid of Adams Center. Jay Johnson met with him right after the San Bernardino shooting.
Here's a question from Olga Matlin. How deep is the corruption in the DHS? Does the whole department need to be purged, or just the top leadership, or how deep does it go?
Well, I think Jay Johnson did a pretty good job of illustrating it. They're stuck on this policy of engagement and dialogue and absolutely refuse to acknowledge the nature of the threat that we face.
Whose phone is that?
People into the administration, despite all evidence to the contrary. You look at James Clapper. What did he say about the Muslim Brotherhood? He's the director of intelligence, right?
Right.
He didn't just decide to make those statements just all on his own. That was a consensus.
What did he say?
He said that the Muslim Brotherhood are not violent, they don't have an agenda, and that they're largely secular.
Yeah, right. I remember that. Largely secular. Incredible. But when you,
Somebody asked me earlier about the PowerPoint. It's
yeah,
certainly fine with me for you to send it out
yeah,
to everyone
yeah,
because I always set my PowerPoints up for that very purpose, to give
right,
them out so that people can go back through. And this is only a little tiny baby short version of the whole trajectory of events. Because in all honesty, I thought I was just going to have 10 or 15 minutes to do it. So I just covered some of the really, really super high points. But I've been tracking this stuff for the last 15 years.
yeah,
And I have archives of historical stuff that is really quite astonishing when you put it all together. What I said about the Daraloon
yeah,
is that they speak Pashtun and Urdu, not Arabic as native language.
right,
And they are most likely going to be affiliated with mosques that have the name Circle or Center,
huh,
Islamic Center or Islamic Circle.
uh-huh,
They are MB, but they are the Pashtun Urdu branch of Muslim Brotherhood.
right. Like the
And
Islamic Circle of the, right,
there you go. That is exactly right. You know, Abdul Aziz, the guy who was the vice president, he's one of the Bangladesh war criminals. And
huh,
he's living over near Corona, Queens, or Flushing, I think it is, New York. They've known about him for years, and then the federal government never did anything to
wow,
intervene. And those are the kind of things that guys like me just scratch our head. When we see Jay Johnson going to Adams Center and standing next to Majid, and that's again, if I have the magic computer, I can show Jay Johnson all the derogatory information on both Majid and the Adams Center in 2 minutes. So the dots are there, they're just deliberately not connecting them, or even worse, they're taking them out of the system,
right,
so then they can turn around like Loretta Lynch said, oh, I'll abide by whatever decision the FBI made vis-a-vis Clinton, when she already knew
yeah,
what they were going to do.
yeah,
That's the level of cynicism that we're looking at. Oh, we didn't connect the dots. Well, the reason why you didn't connect the dots is because there aren't any dots to connect. You're
yeah,
taking them out
right,
of the system as fast as we can put them in. And
right,
then turning, and that's passive. Well, actually, that's the first level of involvement. The second level is what they did to me. They turned around and investigated me for putting them in the first place.
Denise,
Well,
I
I
would
don't
ask,
know. I like Zudi a lot. And Zudi, if you're on the line, I'm supporting you 100%. But you got a hard uphill battle if you're going to try to reform Islam. Now, I suppose it's possible that Islam, as the 5 pillars, could exist without Sharia law. I mean, it is conceivable.
uh-huh,
It's very conceivable that Islam could exist apart from Sharia if you just observe prayer, zakat, hajj, Ramadan, and so on. However, the problem is the Sharia influence. Sharia forces you to make a choice between your allegiance, citizenship, even your moderation. Eventually, you have to succumb or submit to it. Otherwise, you face consequences like what you see all over the world with Boko Haram and ISIS and Hezbollah and everybody else.
right.
They forcibly impose Sharia law on their own people.
What do you think
If
of
they do
the,
that, go ahead.
what do you think of the mosque in Falls Church? One of the people who is,
Dar al-Hijra or Adams Center?
I'm not sure. The person says many government employees. Is that you, Denise?
Yeah, the
Dar
Hijra.
al-Hijra. That's a real rat's nest there. That was on al-Awlaki's mosque. Some of the 9/11 people transited through there. That's again, you got derogatory information on that place up your eyeballs. They're pro-Sharia, they're pro-Jihad, and by the way, their name itself is an ominous name, Dar al-Hijra. That means the house of immigration. And if you know Quran, you know that the Mujahideen, who receive a reward for fighting, receive the same reward as the Muhajirun, those who come here as immigrants. both receive the same reward, and most people don't know that immigrants are rewarded in heaven by Allah the same as jihadis. And when you say Dar al-Hijra, what you're actually saying is an advertisement to the global Islamic movement. Come to America. It's time. Come here. It's like a blinking red light or a White House drawing people from all over the world. And they're basically saying, we will help you integrate not integrate, we will help you come here and get established and become part of what? The observant Muslim base in America. Yes, it is yikes, because these people don't use words arbitrarily.
Yeah.
Just because they like the name of the sound of Dar al-Hijra. No, it's a declaration. You might as well be calling Allahu Akbar from the top of the U.S. Capitol, because that's just about how strong it is.
We probably have the evidence to shut out or shut down organizations like CARE, MSA, ISNA, and ICNA, don't we?
We've had evidence since, if you want to be really precise about it, 2006, but there was a mistrial, not a mistrial, whatever the legal term. They had to go back and do the trial over again, and it was concluded in November 2008. They proved irrefutably in court that these Muslim Brotherhood front groups were providing financial support to Hamas. And the only one that is shut down, every one of them is still operating except for Holy Land itself. But a lot of the people that were involved in Holy Land, like the Bridgeview Mosque up in Chicago, and the whole SAR Foundation network, the International Institute of Islamic Thought near Reston, and all the rest of them are still operating to this very day.
Wow. How come we didn't, I mean, you know, I always read about unindicted co-conspirators like CARE, etc. Why were they unindicted?
Because they didn't have time to address it in that phase of the trial.
No.
It's like they cut up the vegetables for the stir fry, but they had to put them in the refrigerator because they didn't have time to cook everything.
Yeah.
So the plan was to go back and go to phase 2. And that's why Peter King wrote the letter to Eric Holder dated April 15th, 2011, asking him exactly the same question. How come you haven't gone forward with the next phase of the trial? Well, the reason why is because they decided to bring those individuals who are leaders of those organizations into the administration.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So somebody asked, are you saying that many levels of government are infiltrated by Muslims, or I would say the Muslim Brotherhood? And your answer, of course, is yes, right?
Yes, it's pretty self-evident.
Yeah.
You can't blow your nose without CARE coming up behind you.
Vicky Davis asks, how much money is Saudi Arabia providing for foreign direct investment in the U.S.? Do you know anything about that? I don't.
Foreign direct investment?
Well,
I don't know.
How much money
are
are they spending here? Yeah.
Billions on madrasas. That's their forte. When they say they don't support terrorism, from their perspective, it isn't terrorism, because to them, Hamas is not a terrorist group.
Mm.
So we're not even on the same page in terms of what words mean.
Yeah.
Meaning, Hamas to them is a liberation organization. So they support Hamas. To us, Hamas is a designated terrorist organization. So, same word, terrorist group, but we're not even talking about the same thing at all.
Yeah. Right.
And madrasas in Indian subcontinent, those are Deobandis in all their stripes and colors, and they go out all over the world. They're graduating thousands of young boys every year from those madrasas. By the way, that's why my case that was killed was so important, because I caught the first generation of them doing it right here in the United States. These boys don't even finish school. They never get their GRD. Is that right? GED. They memorize the Quran, and then they go overseas and become imams at the madrasas in South Africa, where they teach them in English, even though the U.S. government designated them in what we call IDSO, Intelligence-Driven Special Operations. The government has known that these madrasas in South Africa that are Deobandi, that teach in English for the English-speaking world, are pro-jihad and pro-Sharia, and they let American boys go over there anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I got a question. Can I ask a question, Jim?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, I watched Rich Higgins' interview on Daily Caller when he was, you know him, and he was talking about the purge of key terms and how devastating that was to our Department of National Security. Can you talk about that?
Sure. We talked about it today. What is the strategy of the global Islamic movement? Sharia law. The DHS guidelines that were just published last month say that we shouldn't use the word or discuss the word Sharia. And to me, that is like the immovable object hitting the irresistible force. We have come to the macro collision point where law enforcement and policy and branches of the government can't even discuss the most fundamental strategic goal of the global Islamic movement, which is Sharia law. They have blindfolded us and handcuffed us. Because you could get in trouble for it. Imagine if a person that I interviewed coming from somewhere was sitting in the secondary room where I'm talking to him, and all of a sudden he pulls the DHS guidelines out of his backpack and waves them in my face and said, "You can't ask me about Sharia law because your own government said you can't talk about it. Therefore, I am now very offended, and I'm going to sue you for discrimination and bias." And they do.
So how does that impact communications, emails, any kind of communications counterintelligence uses across even departments?
It puts a damper on it because people are always looking over their shoulder at who's going to be monitoring their emails, or who's going to get some person in the chain gets offended, and all of a sudden you're into a big giant mess that might completely devour your career. Believe me, I went through it 9 times. I was investigated by my own agency 9 times during the course of my career.
So what will the next president, like Trump, if he wins, how can he turn back and get back to reality?
Easy. Let us take their statements at face value and develop our response based on their strategic and tactical statements. Just take it at face value. Now, what we can do as far as at the port level, at the ground level, is teach the active duty personnel how to be more discerning about who these people are, like, let's say, Tablighi. And you can be sure that once they start doing it at big ports like Chicago or LA or New York or Atlanta, that the word will get out real fast. It will. I saw it myself during the Madrasa Boy case that I talk about in the book. They were talking to each other. And they did, the last year of the 5 or so years that I interviewed them, they diverted. They went to other ports so they wouldn't have to come through Atlanta, even though they lived in Atlanta. They landed in Detroit and caught a connecting flight from Detroit back home so they wouldn't have to come and talk to me or guys that I worked with. And the guys at the other ports didn't interview them. There's your gap right there. A perfect micro nutshell illustration of the problem. We're not consistent. But if they went to Detroit and got interviewed, or LA and got interviewed, just like they would have in Atlanta, the word would have got out real fast. You better not try to pull anything because these guys are going to get you. And we're perfectly capable of doing it. And I'm not talking about violating people's basic civil rights or being armed thugs or anything like that. It's simple law enforcement 101. We're very capable of doing it. And that's what I would offer Mr. Trump if he was to become president and he asked me. That's what I would do. I'm a field officer. I'm not a desk jockey. I would go out and work with the people on the ground. And you'd be surprised how fast it would turn around.
Hey, are there any local law enforcement agencies that are inviting you to speak to them?
No, everybody is afraid right now, in all honesty.
Yeah.
Because they know what'll happen.
Yeah.
They saw what happened to me.
Yeah.
And they know the care will be there like white on rice. They have done it 100 times, 200 times during my time of active duty since about 06 when CARE went on the first VIP tour of Chicago O'Hare Airport. The last 10 years, anytime anybody like John Gondolo, for its perfect example, tries to spin up a law enforcement training session somewhere in the middle of a little town in Nebraska, CARE is there. And they will intimidate the management personnel into canceling it probably about 8 times out of 10. You guys, I'm going to have to go.